I don't even know where to start with this, but I guess this is the best place to share. My name's Brad, and I've been married to my wife Marie for 25 years. I thought we had a good thing going, a life built on love, trust, and shared memories. Turns out, I was wrong. A couple of days ago, I got a random text from an unknown number. It was just a link, no message. At first, I ignored it, but something made me click. And that's where it started. The link opened to a video of Marie with a man I didn't recognize. A much younger guy, all muscles and arrogance, doing things that I never thought I'd have to see. The worst part? She was wearing the black lace lingerie I bought her for our 25th wedding anniversary. That night was supposed to be special. We spent the evening at a little cabin near the lake where I proposed to her. I remember her saying it was the best gift anyone had ever given her. I held onto those words like they meant something. Seeing her wear it for someone else felt like being stabbed in the chest. I don't know who sent it or why, but they knew what they were doing. Every frame of that video is burned into my brain. The way she looked at him, the things she said, it wasn't just physical. It was like she wasn't even the same person. While I was still trying to process what I'd just seen, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Marie. Her text was so casual. "Hey, what do you want for dinner? I'm thinking of making lasagna." Lasagna. While I was sitting there, feeling my entire world collapse, she was thinking about dinner. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too much. Instead, I closed the video and sat in silence, trying to make sense of everything. How do you go from celebrating your anniversary to this? I haven't confronted her yet. I don't even know how to begin. But every time I look at her, I see that video. I see the lingerie. I see her smile, only it's not meant for me. Reddit, I need help. I don't know how to handle this. Should I confront her? Should I wait? All I know is, I'll never see her the same way again. The day after I got that video, I couldn't look at her the same way. I avoided her at breakfast, mumbling something about work when she asked if I was okay. Marie didn't seem to notice anything off, or maybe she was pretending not to. She went about her day as if nothing had changed. Folding laundry, humming to herself, texting someone with a smile on her face. I wondered if she was messaging him. I needed answers, but I couldn't just explode without a plan. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started digging. First, I checked her phone when she went to take a shower. My hands were shaking the whole time. I don't even know what I was expecting to find, but my gut told me to look. Sure enough, there were messages from an unsaved number. Scrolling through, I felt the bile rise in my throat. She called him baby and love. She told him she missed him, asked when they could meet again, and even joked about how I'd never find out. One of her texts said, "I wore it for you last night," winky face. I knew exactly what it was. I snapped pictures of the messages with my phone, every last one of them. Then I put her phone back like nothing had happened. After she went out to run errands, I decided to check our home computer. That's when I found the email confirmation for a hotel booking. She'd reserved a suite 2 weeks ago at a place downtown. The dates matched a weekend when she told me she had a girls' night with her old college friends. I couldn't stop shaking. Every piece of evidence just confirmed what I already knew, but seeing it laid out so plainly felt like a punch to the gut. By the time Marie came back, I was in full-on detective mode. I acted normal, probably the best acting I've ever done in my life. She kissed my cheek, asked if I'd taken the trash out, and laughed about something funny she saw at the store. I sat there nodding, playing along, all while wondering how she could lie to my face like this. Now I've got everything I need, proof of her texts, the hotel reservation, and of course the video. But I still haven't confronted her. Something's holding me back. It's not just anger. It's fear. Fear of what'll happen when I finally say it out loud. Fear of hearing her confirm that the woman I've loved for half my life isn't who I thought she was. I don't know how long I can keep this up. Every moment I'm around her feels like walking on broken glass. The next few days felt like torture. I was going through the motions, pretending everything was fine while my mind raced with every horrible thought imaginable. Marie seemed oblivious, or maybe she was just that good at lying. On Thursday night, she suggested we have dinner with some friends. I didn't want to go, but I couldn't come up with an excuse that wouldn't make her suspicious. So there we were, sitting across from Dave and Laura at this trendy little Italian place, pretending to be the perfect couple. Marie was her usual self, laughing at Laura's jokes, complimenting Dave's new haircut. But every time she smiled, I felt like she was mocking me. I wanted to scream, to grab her hand and demand she explain herself in front of everyone. Instead, I stayed quiet, barely touching my food. At one point, Dave looked at me and said, "You okay, Brad? You've been pretty quiet tonight." Marie immediately jumped in. "Oh, he's just stressed with work. You know how it is." She reached over and squeezed my hand, like she cared. I nodded and forced a smile. "Yeah, just a lot on my plate lately." When we got home, Marie asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was just tired, and she didn't push. She kissed me goodnight, went upstairs, and left me alone in the living room with my thoughts. That was when I decided I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I needed to tell someone. The first person I thought of was my brother Dan. He's always been the one I go to when life gets tough. We're not the kind of brothers who talk every day, but when it matters, he's there. I called him the next morning. "Brad? What's up? You sound off," he said, his voice laced with concern. "I need to tell you something, but you can't say anything to anyone, not yet." "Okay," he said slowly. "What's going on?" I told him everything. The video, the texts, the hotel. By the time I finished, I was pacing around my office like a caged animal. "Jesus, Brad," Dan said after a long pause. "Are you sure? I mean, are you absolutely sure?" "I've got proof, Dan. I've got more proof than I ever wanted. Man, I don't even know what to say. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I feel like if I confront her now, I'll just lose it. But I can't keep living like this." Dan told me I needed to stay calm, that blowing up at her wouldn't solve anything. He suggested I talk to a lawyer before making any moves. "You need to protect yourself, Brad," he said. "Don't let her blindside you again." Hearing him say that hit me hard. I hadn't even thought about what this could mean for our finances, our house, everything we've built together. By the time I hung up, I felt like I was carrying a boulder on my chest. But at least I had a plan: stay calm, gather more evidence if I could, and talk to a lawyer. Marie came home that evening acting like nothing was wrong. She kissed me on the cheek, asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said no, claiming I had a headache. "Do you need anything?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "No," I said, not looking at her. "I'm fine." She went upstairs, and I stayed in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, wondering how much longer I could hold it all in. The next morning, I woke up feeling like my chest was in a vice. I hadn't slept more than a couple of hours, and my nerves were shot. Marie was already downstairs, humming as she made coffee, completely unaware of the storm brewing. I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table. She smiled when she saw me and slid a mug in front of me. "Morning, handsome," she said, like it was any other day. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mind replayed the video, her texts, and every lie she'd told me over the last few weeks. "What are you up to today?" she asked. "Work," I mumbled, taking a sip of coffee to avoid her gaze. She tilted her head. "You've been so quiet lately. Are you sure everything's okay?" There it was. The opening. I could have said something right then and there. But instead I froze. "Yeah," I lied. "Just a lot on my mind." She leaned down and kissed the top of my head. "Well, don't let it get to you. You're my rock, you know that." The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Once she left for the gym, another excuse I now saw in a completely different light. I called the lawyer Dan recommended. His name was Mike, and he didn't waste any time. "Infidelity cases aren't as cut and dry as people think," Mike explained. "But if you've got proof, you're ahead of the game. Do you have access to financial records?" "Yeah, I can get them," I said, feeling a strange mix of determination and dread. "Good. Keep everything you find, texts, receipts, anything that shows a pattern. The more evidence you have, the better your position." He also advised me not to confront Marie until I had a clear plan. You want to be in control of the conversation. If you go in angry, you're giving her power. Don't let her manipulate the situation. By the time I hung up, I felt slightly more grounded. At least now I had a direction. But the day took a turn I wasn't prepared for. That afternoon, Marie came home earlier than usual. She seemed flustered, her face red like she'd been caught in a lie she hadn't prepared for. "You're home early," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said, avoiding eye contact. The gym was packed, so I cut it short. I noticed she was holding her phone tighter than usual, almost like she didn't want me to see the screen. My gut told me something was up. "Everything okay?" I asked, watching her closely. "Of course," she said too quickly. "Why wouldn't it be?" She headed straight upstairs without another word, leaving me standing in the kitchen, my suspicion growing by the second. A few minutes later, I heard her in the shower. That was when I saw her gym bag, casually dropped by the door. The zipper was slightly open, and sticking out of the side was a receipt. I reached down and pulled it out. It wasn't from the gym. It was from a cafe downtown, time-stamped just 30 minutes earlier. 2 drinks, 2 sandwiches. My heart was pounding as I stared at it. She wasn't at the gym. She was with someone else. That's when it hit me, she was getting careless. Or maybe she thought I'd never suspect her. Either way, this was the first real crack in her mask. I put the receipt back exactly where I found it and went to my office, my mind racing. The evidence was piling up, but so was the anger. I was getting closer to confronting her, but not yet. Not until I was ready. That evening, I couldn't sit still. Every time I looked at Marie, my mind went back to the cafe receipt, imagining her sitting across from him, smiling, laughing, everything she used to do with me. I could feel the anger bubbling under the surface, but I bit it back. I had to stay in control. After dinner, Marie was in an unusually good mood. She asked if I wanted to watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in weeks. "Not tonight," I said. Her smile faltered. "You sure? I feel like we haven't spent much time together lately." I stared at her for a second too long. "I've been busy," I said, standing up. "Maybe another time." She watched me as I left the room, her expression shifting from confusion to something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe. Or maybe she was just annoyed I wasn't playing along. I went upstairs and locked the bedroom door behind me. It was a small, silent victory, but it felt good to deny her access to me. The next day, I decided to follow her. I told her I had a work meeting that would run late and waited for her to leave the house. Sure enough, she grabbed her gym bag and headed out around 11 a.m. I gave her a head start and then followed her car from a distance. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She didn't go to the gym. Instead, she drove downtown and parked near the cafe from the receipt. I stayed a block away, watching as she got out of the car. She was wearing the same casual outfit she'd left in, but her hair was freshly done, and her makeup was just a little too perfect for a workout. She went inside, and not even 2 minutes later, he walked in. The man from the video. Seeing him in person was like a slap to the face. He was everything I wasn't: tall, muscular, confident. The kind of guy who probably never had to work hard to get what he wanted. Marie greeted him with a hug, and they sat down together at a table by the window. She was smiling, laughing, her hand brushing his arm like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stayed in the car, my chest heaving with each breath. Part of me wanted to storm in there, throw the evidence on the table, and watch the color drain from her face. But I didn't. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. After about an hour, they left the cafe together. I followed them to a nearby hotel, the same one from the reservation I'd found on her computer. Watching them walk inside, laughing like teenagers, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. It took everything I had not to lose it right there in the car. When I got home that afternoon, Marie was already back. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, humming to herself like she didn't have a care in the world. "How was your meeting?" she asked, glancing at me with that same practiced smile. "Productive," I said, my voice cold. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. As I stood there watching her, I realized something. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I built a life with, was gone. Or maybe she was never really there to begin with. That night, I couldn't pretend anymore. Everything about Marie's movements, her words, her fake little laughs grated on my nerves. I couldn't sit through another meal with her, so I made up an excuse about feeling sick and went to bed early. Lying there in the dark, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the day. The cafe, the hotel, the smiles. It all looped in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I didn't know how long I'd been lying there when the bedroom door creaked open. Marie slipped in, her phone in hand, the glow of the screen lighting up her face. She hesitated, like she wasn't sure she should wake me, then set the phone on the nightstand and climbed into bed. For a moment, I thought she was going to say something. But instead she rolled over, her back to me, and soon her breathing evened out as she fell asleep. I reached for her phone. I didn't need the passcode. I'd seen her enter it enough times. Once I was in, I scrolled through her texts and found a new thread with him, Chris. His name felt like poison in my mouth. The texts were everything I expected and worse. He called her my girl. She called him baby. There were plans for next weekend, jokes about our spot at the hotel, and even a picture of the two of them at the cafe earlier that day. Then I saw it. A text from her. Don't worry, Brad will never find out. He's too trusting. Trusting. That word hit me harder than anything else. She wasn't just cheating on me, she was mocking me, taking advantage of the very thing I thought made our marriage strong. I put the phone back and left the room, unable to be near her. Downstairs, I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, my mind spinning. This wasn't just about catching her in the act anymore. It was about taking back control of my life. I opened my laptop and started putting everything together. The video, the texts, the pictures from the cafe and hotel. I even downloaded screenshots from her messages with Chris. By the time I was done, the sun was starting to rise. Marie came downstairs not long after, rubbing her eyes and looking surprised to see me awake. Couldn't sleep, she asked, her voice soft. I stared at her, wondering how she could stand there so casually after everything she'd done. Something like that, I said. She poured herself a cup of coffee, humming under her breath, then turned to me with a smile. I was thinking we could do something nice this weekend. Maybe go out to dinner. Her audacity was unreal. She had plans with him next weekend, and she wanted to play happy wife with me in the meantime. I'll think about it, I said, keeping my tone neutral. She tilted her head, studying me. You've been so distant lately. Are you sure everything's okay? I smiled, a tight, controlled smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'm fine, Marie. Don't worry about me. She smiled back, satisfied with my answer. But in my head, the plan was already forming. The next few days were like walking through a fog, every interaction with Marie laced with tension I couldn't let her see. She carried on as if everything was normal, her smile intact, her laugh ringing through the house like she hadn't betrayed me in the worst possible way. I focused on my plan. The lawyer Mike had been clear about what I needed to do: stay calm, gather evidence, and be deliberate. Confronting her now would give her time to spin the story, to make me the villain. I couldn't let that happen. That Friday, Marie mentioned she was meeting some friends for lunch. She said it casually, like it wasn't even worth discussing, but I knew better. Which friends? I asked, keeping my tone light. Oh, just Sarah and Liz, she said, not meeting my eyes as she adjusted her purse strap. You know, girl stuff. I nodded, pretending to buy her excuse, and watched her leave. As soon as the door closed, I grabbed my keys and followed her. It didn't take long to confirm what I already knew. She wasn't meeting Sarah and Liz. She was meeting him. They parked in the same spot downtown, walked into the same cafe, sat at the same table. The familiarity of it all made my stomach turn. This time, I didn't just sit in my car. I went into the cafe and took a seat where I could see them, but they couldn't see me. Watching them up close was worse than I expected. The way she leaned toward him, laughing at something he said. The way he reached across the table to touch her hand. I snapped a few pictures with my phone, then left before they could notice me. When they headed to the hotel, I followed at a distance, parking where I had a clear view of the entrance. They disappeared inside, and I stayed in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. An hour passed. Then 2. When they finally came out, they were holding hands, her head resting on his shoulder like they didn't have a care in the world. I took more pictures, my chest tightening with every click of the camera. This was it. I had everything I needed. That night, when Marie came home, she was glowing. She kissed my cheek, asked about my day, and curled up on the couch with a book, acting like nothing had happened. I couldn't look at her. Instead, I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and pulled out my laptop. I uploaded everything I'd gathered, the texts, the pictures, the video, and organized it into a neat little folder. When I was done, I wrote an email to Mike, attaching all the evidence. I explained everything, every detail I could think of, and asked him to let me know what my next steps should be. Before I hit send, I sat there staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. This was it. Once I sent this, there was no going back. I took a deep breath, clicked send, and closed the laptop. It was done. The weekend passed quietly. Marie was her usual self, chatting about errands, laughing at a TV show, and scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I avoided her as much as possible, giving her vague answers and excuses about work whenever she tried to engage me. I didn't confront her, not yet. Mike's email came late Saturday night. "Brad, you've got a strong case here. The evidence is clear, but tread carefully. Don't tip her off before we have everything in place. I suggest we meet early next week to finalize a plan. Stay calm, and don't engage unless necessary." It was exactly what I needed to hear. For now, I just had to keep playing along. Marie didn't seem to notice my coldness, or if she did, she didn't let on. On Sunday evening, as we were cleaning up after dinner, she turned to me with a sly smile. "Brad, I've been thinking," she said. "How about a weekend getaway? Just the two of us. It's been ages since we've had some real quality time." Her audacity almost knocked the wind out of me. She wanted a romantic trip while sneaking off to hotels with him? I forced a smile. "That sounds nice. Let me check my schedule." She nodded, clearly pleased, and went back to drying dishes. Inwardly, I was seething. The gall of her suggestion only solidified my decision. I was done being her safety net, the fool she thought she could keep in the dark. I spent the rest of the night making notes for my meeting with Mike, listing everything I needed to cover: financials, custody, the house. By the time I finished, I felt more prepared than I had in weeks. Marie went to bed early, and I stayed downstairs, staring at the folder of evidence on my laptop. The storm was coming, and she had no idea. Monday morning came, and with it, a sense of grim determination. Marie kissed me goodbye as I left for work, her lips brushing my cheek like nothing was amiss. I resisted the urge to flinch and muttered something about a busy day ahead. Instead of heading to the office, I drove straight to Mike's. His firm was a modest place, professional but unpretentious, which put me at ease. Mike wasted no time. He went over the evidence I'd sent, nodding as he reviewed the photos, messages, and receipts. "This is solid, Brad," he said. "We'll need to move quickly, but you're in a strong position." He outlined the plan: file for divorce, secure my assets, and draft a custody agreement that prioritized fairness. It felt like I was stepping into battle, but with someone who knew the terrain better than I did. As I left his office, a mix of relief and dread settled over me. The wheels were in motion now. Back home, Marie was in the kitchen, smiling as she prepared dinner. "You're home early," she said. I shrugged. "Just didn't feel like staying late." "Good," she replied, setting the table. "It's nice having you around more." I studied her, wondering how she could look so content when everything she'd built with me was about to crumble. She hummed to herself, completely unaware that I was steps away from dismantling the life we shared. The rest of the evening passed quietly, but I barely heard a word she said. My mind was focused on the next steps, rehearsing how I would deliver the truth to her when the time came. For now, I played the part. But every smile, every laugh from her felt like salt in the wound. I went to bed early, leaving her downstairs, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion took over. The confrontation was coming, and soon. Tuesday morning, I met with Mike again to finalize the paperwork. He'd prepared everything: the divorce petition, the property agreements, and a request for temporary orders to keep things stable while the process unfolded. "Brad," Mike said, leaning forward, "once you hand her these, you need to be ready for anything. She might deny it, cry, or even lash out. Stay calm, and don't let her manipulate you." I nodded, the weight of what I was about to do pressing on me. "I'll handle it." By the time I got home, the papers were tucked neatly in my briefcase. Marie was in the living room, scrolling on her phone, looking as carefree as ever. "Hey, you're early again," she said, smiling up at me. "Yeah," I replied, setting my briefcase on the counter. "Needed some time to think." She tilted her head, concern flickering across her face. "Everything okay?" For a split second, I almost wanted to say no, to lay it all out right there. But Mike's words rang in my ears. "Not yet." "Yeah," I said instead, forcing a small smile. "Just work stuff." Marie nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her phone. I stood there for a moment, watching her, the urge to confront her building. But I stuck to the plan. The next step was getting the papers delivered, by me. Mike had suggested hiring a process server, but I wanted to be the one to do it. She needed to hear this from me, face to face. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining how she'd react, wondering if she'd finally drop the act or double down on her lies. By the time morning came, I was ready. I kissed her cheek as she slept, a bitter farewell to the life we'd built, and left the house to prepare for the confrontation that would change everything. By Wednesday afternoon, everything was in place. I had the divorce papers in my hands, along with a folder containing copies of the evidence. Texts, photos, the hotel receipts, even a snapshot from the cafe. I'd arranged to meet Marie at home for lunch. She was excited when I suggested it. She even said she'd cook something special. When I walked in, the smell of her famous chicken Alfredo filled the air. She turned, smiling brightly. "This is a nice surprise. I can't remember the last time we had lunch together at home." I couldn't bring myself to respond right away. My stomach churned as I watched her bustle around the kitchen, humming. "Marie," I finally said, my voice steady but cold. She glanced at me, her smile faltering slightly. "What's wrong? We need to talk." Her brow furrowed. "Okay. What about?" I pulled the envelope of papers from my bag and set it on the table. Then I placed the folder of evidence beside it. Her eyes flicked between the two, confusion giving way to something else. Fear. "What's this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't sit down. I stayed standing, arms crossed. "It's everything, Marie. Every lie. Every betrayal. All the proof." She froze, her hands trembling as she reached for the folder. Slowly, she opened it, her eyes scanning the photos, the screenshots. Her face drained of color as she realized what she was looking at. "Brad. I can explain." "Don't," I cut her off. "Don't insult me by trying to explain this away." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at me. "It's not what it looks like. Please just let me." "It's exactly what it looks like, Marie," I said, my voice sharp. "You lied to me. You cheated on me. And now it's over." She stood, the folder falling to the floor, and reached for my arm. "Brad, please." I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "Don't. Just don't." Her tears spilled over, her voice cracking. "I was going to end it with him. I swear. I love you, Brad. You have to believe me." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "You love me? Is that why you were sneaking around with him, staying in hotels, laughing at how I'd never find out? That's not love, Marie." She sank into the chair, her hands covering her face. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake. But we can fix this, can't we? We've been through so much together." I shook my head. "Not this. You broke something that can't be fixed. The papers are in front of you. Sign them, or I'll take this to court." The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Marie sat there, her face buried in her hands, her sobs muffled but shaking her whole body. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the video, the texts, the lies, every calculated choice she made to betray me. When she finally looked up, her mascara was smudged, her eyes red and swollen. "Brad," she said, her voice trembling, "please, don't do this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, my tone firm. "You had a choice, Marie. You could have come to me, told me the truth, tried to fix things before it got to this. But instead you lied. Over and over. There's no coming back from that." Her tears turned to anger. "It wasn't like I wanted this to happen. I didn't plan for it." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "So what? It just happened every time you snuck off to a hotel with him? Every time you lied to my face? Stop pretending this was some accident, Marie." She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, realizing there was nothing she could say to make this better. After a long silence, she looked at the papers still sitting on the table. "If I sign these," she whispered, "what happens next?" "That depends on you," I said. "Sign them, and we handle this quietly. I won't go out of my way to ruin your reputation, but I'm not going to protect it either. Or you can fight me in court, and everything, including that video, becomes public record." Her face paled at the mention of the video. She nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she picked up the pen. The room felt heavy, the air thick with tension, as she scrawled her name at the bottom of each page. When she finished, she pushed the papers toward me and stared at the table. I gathered the documents, sliding them into my briefcase without a word. "Brad," she said softly, her voice breaking. "What about us? 25 years. Does that mean nothing to you?" I looked at her, my jaw tight. "It meant everything to me, Marie. But apparently, it didn't mean enough to you." Her tears started again, but I didn't stay to watch. I walked out, closing the door behind me, and sat in my car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel as the weight of what just happened settled over me. It was done. Driving away from the house felt like stepping into a void. I couldn't bring myself to look back, not even in the rearview mirror. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles pale, as though keeping control of the car would help me hold onto the shreds of my composure. The house, that house, was no longer a home. It was just walls, floors, and a roof filled with ghosts. Ghosts of laughter, of Christmas mornings, of anniversaries spent curled up together in front of the fireplace. But now it was also haunted by secrets, lies, and the memory of her betrayal. I drove aimlessly at first, letting the car take me wherever the roads felt familiar. For the first few miles, all I could hear was the echo of Marie's voice. Her pleas, her excuses. I was going to end it. "I love you, Brad. Please, you have to believe me." Believe her? The very idea churned my stomach. She didn't end it. She didn't even try. She played me for a fool, taking advantage of my trust while sneaking off to hotels with him. The image of her signing the divorce papers, her hand trembling, her tears dripping onto the table, should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow, like a battle won in a war I never wanted to fight. Eventually, I found myself pulling into Dan's driveway. I wasn't even sure why. Maybe I just needed to see someone who knew me, someone who could anchor me in reality. Dan opened the door before I even knocked. He must have seen me through the window, standing there with my shoulders slumped, looking as lost as I felt. "Brad," he said simply, stepping aside to let me in. I walked past him into the living room and sank onto his couch, barely noticing the scattered toys and half-eaten snacks that littered the room. Dan sat across from me, watching quietly, giving me space to speak first. "It's done," I said finally, my voice flat. Dan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She signed them." "Yeah." I nodded, my hands gripping my knees. "She signed them." She cried, she begged, but in the end she signed. Dan let out a slow breath. "How do you feel?" I laughed bitterly. "How do you think?" "Angry. Sad. Relieved. Numb. All at once." He nodded, understanding. "It's a lot, man. You've been through hell." 25 years, Dan," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "We were supposed to grow old together. That was the plan. And now it's just gone." Dan didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, letting the silence fill the space. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Brad, you did what you had to do. She made her choices. Don't carry the weight of her decisions." I wanted to believe him, but the words felt hollow. Marie's betrayal was hers, but the fallout was mine to deal with. The life I thought I'd have, the love, the partnership, was over, and there was no fixing it. We sat in silence for a while, the sounds of Dan's kids playing upstairs a faint reminder that life was still moving forward, even if mine felt like it was stuck in place. "What now?" Dan asked eventually. "I don't know," I admitted. "Mike's handling the legal stuff. I guess I'll stay in a hotel for now, figure out the next steps later." Dan nodded. "You're welcome to crash here if you need to." "Thanks," I said, managing a small smile. "But I think I need some space. Some time to think." After leaving Dan's, I checked into a modest hotel on the edge of town. The room was clean but bare, a far cry from the comfort of home. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the bed, staring at the divorce papers spread out in front of me. Marie's signature was on every page, staring back at me like a final undeniable truth. This wasn't just the end of our marriage, it was the end of the life we'd built together. The end of us. I thought about the Marie I used to know, the woman who held my hand during our son's birth, who stayed up late helping me prepare for work presentations, who laughed so hard she cried when I tried to bake her a birthday cake and ended up setting off the smoke alarm. That woman felt like a stranger now, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I sat there for hours, cycling through memories, each one sharper and more painful than the last. The good times, the bad, the quiet moments in between, they all felt tainted now, overshadowed by what she'd done. At some point, exhaustion took over. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet my thoughts. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, not the Marie I fell in love with, but the one laughing with him at the cafe, walking hand in hand into a hotel. The betrayal was a weight I didn't know how to carry. When the sun finally rose, I was still awake, the faint light creeping through the curtains casting long shadows across the room. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about the future, not the one I'd planned with Marie, but the one I'd have to rebuild from scratch. It felt impossible, like trying to start over after a wildfire burned everything to the ground. But there was a tiny flickering hope deep inside me, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. It was faint, but it was there. The days after the confrontation with Marie passed in a blur. Each morning, I woke up in the sterile hotel room, disoriented for a moment before the weight of reality settled back onto my chest. Every hour felt like a battle to stay afloat, to keep from drowning in the tidal wave of emotions that surged through me: grief, anger, humiliation, and the hollow ache of betrayal. Marie texted me several times. Her messages started with apologies. "Brad, I'm so sorry. Please, let's talk." Then they turned to bargaining. "We can fix this. I'll do anything." Finally, they became desperate. "You can't just throw away everything we've built. Please don't give up on us." I didn't respond to any of them. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't feel like pouring gasoline on an already blazing fire. Dan checked in regularly, calling to make sure I was holding up. "You're doing the right thing," he kept telling me. "Just keep moving forward." But forward felt like a foreign concept. Every step I tried to take felt like walking through quicksand. I spent my days preparing for the legal proceedings. Mike had been thorough, helping me sort through the financials, outlining my rights, and ensuring I was prepared for what lay ahead. The practical work helped distract me, but only for so long. It was the nights that were the worst. The silence of the hotel room amplified everything: the memories, the doubts, the aching loneliness. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had all gone so wrong. One night, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was Marie, smiling on our anniversary, holding up a glass of champagne. There she was on the beach during our last family vacation, laughing as the wind messed up her hair. And then there were the candid moments: Marie reading on the couch, her face lit up by the soft glow of the lamp, or the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed at one of my dumb jokes. I wanted to smash the phone, to delete every image, but I couldn't. Those moments were real ones. Weren't they? Or had I been blind all along? The weekend came, and with it, a strange sense of finality. I hadn't responded to Marie, and I hadn't been back to the house. It felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the next move. On Sunday morning, my phone buzzed with a call. I almost ignored it, assuming it was Marie again, but when I glanced at the screen, it was a number I didn't recognize. "Hello." I answered, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "Brad, it's Laura." Laura, one of Marie's friends. My stomach tightened. "What do you want, Laura?" I asked, wary. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice hesitant. "But I thought you should know. Marie told me everything. About Chris, the divorce, all of it." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "She's a mess, Brad," Laura continued. "I'm not excusing what she did, but she's falling apart. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She says she regrets everything." I clenched my jaw. "She regrets getting caught, Laura. That's not the same as regretting what she did." There was a long pause before she replied. "Maybe. But I thought you'd want to know. She's not herself right now. If there's any part of you that still cares about her, maybe you should talk to her." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Did I still care? Could I ever care again after what she'd done? "Thanks for letting me know," I said finally, my voice flat. "But this is between me and Marie." I hung up before Laura could say anything else. The call left me rattled, the questions swirling in my mind like a storm. I'd spent weeks focusing on what Marie had done, on the lies, the betrayal. But now, for the first time, I found myself wondering about her side of it. Had she been unhappy? Lonely? Was there some part of our marriage that I'd failed to see, some crack that allowed Chris to slip in? I hated that I was even asking those questions. She was the one who cheated. She was the one who broke our vows. But still, the doubt lingered. By Sunday evening, I was pacing the hotel room, trying to decide what to do. My phone buzzed again, another text from Marie. I'm sorry. I'll keep saying it until you believe me. I know I hurt you, but I need you to know how much I love you. Please don't shut me out. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. But I didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, I sat down, opened my laptop, and started writing. I didn't know if it was a letter to Marie, a journal entry, or just a way to get my thoughts out of my head. But as the words spilled onto the screen, I felt a flicker of clarity. This wasn't just about Marie's betrayal. It was about me, about who I was, what I wanted, and how I would move forward. Because no matter what happened next, I couldn't stay in this void forever. Monday morning brought a sense of uneasy calm. I hadn't replied to Marie's texts or called anyone back. For the first time in weeks, I felt the pull of the future instead of the weight of the past. The divorce was moving forward. Mike assured me everything was progressing smoothly, and for now, I trusted him to handle it. I needed to focus on something else, something that wasn't her. After a quick breakfast at the hotel, I drove to a nearby park. It was a cool autumn morning, the kind that makes you stop and breathe a little deeper. Sitting on a bench, I let the quiet surround me. For the first time in years, I asked myself, what did I want? Who was I, beyond the marriage? It was a frightening question, but the more I thought about it, the less it felt like an ending and more like a blank page. My phone buzzed. It was Dan. How are you holding up? Let's do lunch. I smiled and texted back. At the diner, Dan listened as I unloaded everything. Marie's texts, my doubts, my fears about what came next. You've already done the hard part, he said. Now it's about rebuilding. Start small. Find things that make you happy. What if I don't even know what that is anymore? Dan shrugged. You'll figure it out. Just don't let her pull you back. After lunch, I passed a gym and decided to stop. I signed up for a membership on a whim, something I'd been meaning to do for years but always postponed. The workout wasn't easy, but it felt good, like I was taking control of something, however small. That night, back at the hotel, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't in weeks: hope. Marie's texts were still coming, but I ignored them. For now, I was focusing on myself.